senses part of our nervous system chapters. Okay, so for this one, obviously there's a bunch of different special senses, but for testing purposes, we're going to focus on vision and hearing. Okay, so those are the things that I really want you to concentrate. And for this one, we're going to kind of go over vision and a little bit just about the general sort of info for the special senses. So when we talk about special senses, we're looking at, most of these we kind of know. The only one most people forget is going to be the equilibrium one, but it's vision, taste, smell, hearing, and equilibrium. Okay, and then what you want to realize is that we have these special special receptors that are going to allow us to kind of do these things. Okay, so for the special senses, we have distinct receptor cells. They're going to be highly localized in the head. So when you think about vision, taste, smell, hearing, a lot of these things are happening sort of up in your head. They're going to be housed in very complex sensory organs or epithelial structures. And again, you're looking at the eyes, the ears, the taste buds, and our olfactory, or the things that we use for our smell. So vision is going to be your dominant sense, and this is a really kind of crazy thing to kind of look at, but 70% of all the sensory receptors in the body are going to be in your eyes. So that's basically telling you that a lot of the information that we're taking in sensory-wise is coming in through your vision, okay? And nearly half of the cerebral cortex, so we looked at the brain, and we want to realize that nearly half of the cerebral cortex is involved in sort of this visual processing or processing that information that your eyes are coming in. So that is a extraordinary number and an extraordinary percentage of info that we're taking in through our vision. Okay, so we have these accessory structures, and a lot of these we kind of know of, and we want to just know what their general function is. Okay, so these are going to be mostly protective. They're going to aid in eye function, and these are, a lot of people think like, oh, what does my eyebrow do, or what does my eyelid do? But you want to just have a general idea of sort of what their basic function is, and again, it's going to be mostly protective. Okay. So eyebrows, eyelids, conjunctiva. Some people have heard of conjunctiva a little bit. Lacrimal apparatus, and then we have our extrinsic eye muscles. So here's a picture of all those structures. Okay, so your eyebrow, you just want to be able to sort of identify all the different parts. Okay, your eyebrows obviously are going to be short, coarse hairs. They're going to be sort of above your eye, right? So they overlie the supraorbital margins of the skull. They're going to help shade your eyes from sunlight, and they're going to also prevent perspiration or sweat from kind of getting into your eyes. So your eyebrows do have a function. Your eyelids are going to be muscles, okay? They're going to be activated reflexively to cause blinking every 3 to 7 seconds, right? So I have muscles that are attached to my eyelids. They cause blinking 3 to 7 seconds, and again, they're trying to really prevent things from being able to sort of hit your eye, and it's kind of amazing how quickly you'll sort of blink as things kind of come towards your face to sort of protect your eyes, because your eyes are very sensitive. Okay, so protect the eye from foreign objects. They're going to help me to spread secretions, so this is kind of why we blink so often, is to kind of keep the eyes moist. And then I'm going to have my eyelashes, and again, they're going to be highly innervated, and they're going to be reflective blinking to touch or air. And again, if anything kind of touches your eyelashes, it's going to cause you to sort of blink really quickly. So it's almost like things hit your eyelashes first before they even have a chance to kind of get to your eyelids. Conjunctiva, again, some people have kind of heard of this again, but it's basically just these transparent mucous membranes, okay, and I have two. I have a palpebral conjunctiva that lines the actual eyelids, and then I have a bulbar conjunctiva that's actually going to be over the eyeball itself, and again, they're going to produce this lubricating mucus, and again, their main job is just to keep your eye from kind of drying out, okay, so here's a picture of our two conjunctiva, and again, I want to know that one lines the actual eye, and one is going to actually line the kind of backside of the eyelid. Okay, and this is kind of where most people have kind of heard of their conjunctiva, is this conjunctivitis, which is going to be inflammation of this mucous membrane. So when you hear about pink eye, and a lot of us, we kind of don't really realize what's going on with pink eye, but it's this infection of these conjunctiva, okay, and it's usually bacteria, virus, very contagious. This is one of those things where you really have to just kind of be very careful if you're around anybody that has pink eye, or if you have pink eye, you want to stay kind of away and make sure you're not touching things, because it is very contagious, okay? And this is just a bad picture to kind of make you realize how serious it can be, and just how painful and how difficult it can make just getting through your normal day until it kind of settles down. Okay, so one of those things that you want to be extra careful if you know of anyone or you're around anybody that has pink eye. And now we know that, if someone has pink eye, is that inflammation of that, or the infection of that conjunctiva. Lacrimal apparatus. Lacrimal means tears. Okay, so it's going to be glands and ducts that are producing our tears. The gland's going to be in the superior lateral end of the orbit. We'll see a picture here in a second. It's going to release this diluted saline solution, which is, again, just a salty solution Your lacrimal solution is also going to have mucus in there. It's going to have antibodies, lysosomes, okay, things that are going to kind of keep everything healthy, destroy bacteria. Its main purpose is to clean, protect, moisten, and lubricate the eye surface. And then again, our lacrimal secretions are going to drain into our nasal cavity. And we kind of know that this is true because what you find when people kind of cry or they get really, really upset and they're forming tears, they're also going to get really, really stuffy. So we kind of know just from experience where these things are going to kind of go to. Okay, but here's a little picture of the gland. And again, it's going to secrete the tears. They're going to sweep across the eye. And then again, they're going down into that nasal cavity. Okay. Extrinsic eye muscles responsible for our eye movements. If you guys did the test, the neural test where you had to follow the pen or follow the fingertip and make that H pattern with your eyes, you realize that you can move your eyes in a million different directions, okay? But we have 6 strap-like extrinsic eye muscles control the movement of the eyeball. This part always kind of freaks me out a little bit too, is that the muscles are going to originate on the walls of the orbit, okay? So they're going to start off on your skull, but they're going to attach on the outer surface of the eyeball. So you actually have the muscles that are attaching to the eyeball. Allows the eyes to follow moving objects. It's going to help maintain the eyeball shape, and it's also going to hold the eye in the proper position in the orbit. So here's a picture of all our muscles, and again, I have 2 eyes, so I'm going to have muscles on either side, and you can kind of find the nose, and that kind of helps you know which muscles are sort of medial versus which muscles are going to be lateral. Okay, so that's a good landmark for when you're labeling, is kind of if you get this picture where you have the nasal bone, I know that this is on the opposite side, so I know this is going to be lateral. Okay, and I'm going to show you another way to kind of know if I don't give you the nasal bone. Okay, so here's a picture of all the muscles, and they're not super, super hard, right? I get a superior rectus, inferior rectus, I get a medial rectus, a lateral rectus, so those are going to pull me up and down, side to side, and then I get these oblique muscles here, okay, so superior oblique, going to be on the top, going to come on a little bit of an angle, and then I get this inferior oblique, and that's going to be more towards the bottom. What you want to remember for this one is that the inferior oblique is going to attach laterally, okay, so if you get this picture and I can't see the nose, you want to remember that that inferior oblique is going to be from the bottom because it's inferior, but it's going to come up and attach laterally, and that's going to let you know that this is the lateral rectus and not the medial rectus, okay? Superior oblique, again, is going to be up at the top, but that inferior oblique is the one that I always use to sort of remember, make sure, because if you disorientate yourself and you're not too sure which one's medial, which one's lateral, it's easier to kind of get a bunch of things wrong. So those are the ones that you want to kind of pay attention to. And again, they're just going to pull your eye in a bunch of different directions. Here's the picture with the nasal bone. And I can see the lateral rectus here, and I can see that inferior oblique, but you can really see here how that inferior oblique comes up, attaches really, really close to that lateral rectus, okay? And then the superior, all the other ones are not super, super bad, not super hard to remember. But we do have to, this is one of those pictures that we do have to be able to sort of label for our practical, okay? And then here's a picture from the top. And again, I can see this is my nasal bone here, and I can see the superior oblique, and that kind of lets me know that, hey, this is going to be medial, this is going to be lateral, and again, you can see some of the muscles are cut away here too. And on this one, you can't really see that inferior oblique from the bottom. All right, and here just gives you, these ones, again, you don't have to necessarily memorize them, right? If you go back to this picture and you think about this muscle, and you think if I shorten this muscle and I pull these two, the insertion and the origin together, it's going to pull my eye and sort of make me look up. So a lot of these you can sort of think about, if I shorten that muscle, which direction is it going to pull my eye? And then that's going to keep you from kind of having to sort of memorize all these different little actions, okay? Okay, so now we get to a little bit of the trickier part, and at this part we're going to go over just the structure of the eyeball and just what kind of the functions are and how everything is set up, and then we'll come back for part 2 and we'll look at, okay, how do I actually see things and how does this vision kind of take place, okay? But for right now, you want to have this picture that I'm going to show you in a second, and you just want to make sure that you can identify and kind of find all these different little structures, okay? So your eyeball is a slightly irregular hollow sphere, okay? Its wall is going to be composed of 3 layers, so it's going to have a fibrous layer, a vascular layer, and it's going to have an inner layer, and you want to, this one always, the tougher layer is always going to be on the outside, so that's one of those things where I'm going to have the fibrous layer on the outside, and then I'm going to work my way to the inside, but you want to know which layer comes first, which one's in the middle, which one's more towards the inside. And this is the picture that I'm kind of talking to because it kind of has everything. This one you're going to have to label on your practical too, so this is one that you just want to really practice kind of finding all these structures kind of on this picture and have it kind of beside you so that as we're going through the structures you can look back and kind of find the exact structure that we're kind of talking about, okay? But here are my 3 layers, okay? 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to break them down into each layer is going to have some different little parts to it too. So the fibrous layer is the outermost coat of the eyeball, composed of dense avascular connective tissue. Again, I have to attach my muscles onto here. It has two different regions, and it's going to have the sclera and the cornea. And a lot of the eye terms we've sort of heard, but maybe we just don't know exactly, what they're going to do for me. Okay, so the sclera is going to form the bulk posterior fibrous layer, so the back part of the fibrous layer, seen anteriorly as the whites of the eyes. Very good multiple choice question. Which part of the eyeball is actually the whites of the eyes. It's going to be tough and tendon-like. It protects and shapes the eyeball, produces a sturdy anchoring site for muscles, and then towards the back, where you're going to always see in the picture that optic nerve is kind of coming out the back because it's got to send this info up to the brain. Okay, so here is, go back to the picture, find the sclera. You can see it moves all the way around this part, and again, that's just going to be the white outermost part of the back part of the eye. Okay, cornea, again, we've heard of corneas because you hear a scratch cornea, you hear about different little injuries, but this is going to be the anterior sixth, so just the front sixth of that fibrous layer. So most of it is the sclera. It's going to bulge anteriorly from its junction with the sclera. It's creating this window that's going to allow light to enter, because that's really what I'm doing with my eyes, allowing light to kind of enter through this opening so that it can sort of stimulate these receptors and send that information up to my brain. Okay, so we have this external layer that protects it from abrasion. We're going to have this inner layer that's going to help have these pumps to kind of keep everything really clear so we can see good. Going to be well supplied with nerve endings and pain receptors, and we all sort of know that because we know that our eyes are really, 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 really sensitive. Okay, another good multiple choice question. The cornea is the most exposed part of the eye, most vulnerable part. Okay, so it's going to come into contact with a bunch of things from the environment. Very high capacity for regeneration and a very high capacity to kind of repair itself and sort of keep our vision as good as possible. Okay, so here, come up this way, find that cornea. There you can see sclera comes around, cornea in the front. All right, now we get to layer 2, so vascular layer. And again, this is vascular is always going to mean blood supply, right? So it forms the middle coat of the eyeball, contains blood vessels that supply the eye. This one's going to have 3 regions. It's going to have a choroid, it's going to have the ciliary body, and it's going to have the iris. The iris is probably the only one from this layer that we're sort of familiar with, okay? So here is the choroid. And this is going to be the blood vessel rich part. It's going to be dark, have this dark brown membrane. It's going to form the 5/6 of the vascular layer. So it's going to be most of the vascular layer is going to be this choroid. Okay, blood vessels nourish all the layers of the eye. Very important question when those blood vessel questions or nourishment questions always come up. Brown pigment is produced by melanocytes. We've already learned about those in the skin chapter. They're going to help absorb light. They're going to prevent light from scattering within the eye. And then again, we have that optic nerve sort of coming out the back. Okay, so we want to go second layer. I find this choroid. Okay, and we can see that it kind of changes as we get up towards the front. So now we get to the ciliary body, okay? So we're kind of moving a little more anteriorly. So anteriorly, the choroid becomes the ciliary body, and this is going to be a thickened ring of tissue that encircles the lens, okay? And we'll see that in a picture here in a second. Consists of interlacing smooth muscle bundles. So I have ciliary muscles. They're going to control my lens shape. I have these ciliary processes. They're going to secrete the fluid that fills up the cavities in the eye. And then I have these ciliary zonules, and these are going to be just the suspensory ligaments that are going to hold that lens in the proper position for me. Okay, so here's as I get to the front, right? So this whole thing is the ciliary body, and I can see that here's my muscle, here's my processes, and then here are my ligaments, and I can see that they're attached to this lens here. Okay, but then they're also going to be attached to this iris here. As I come up to the front, we'll talk about the iris here in a second too. So this is kind of just behind the iris. So now we get to the iris, and the rainbow's here because this is going to be the colorful part of your eye, okay? But it does, probably one of the most important things is the iris is this controlling this opening, which is your pupil that we'll talk about here in a second too. So the iris is the colored part of the eye, most anterior part of the vascular layer. It's going to lie between the cornea and the lens. It has a round central opening, and remember, your pupil is just a hole. It's just an opening, okay? And it's allowing light to enter into the eye. The iris is going to be made up of 2 smooth muscle layers with many sticky elastic fibers, and again, they're going to form this random pattern. but they're going to be the iris. Most important thing is the muscles allow reflective change in the pupil size, and the iris is, this contraction or relaxation of the iris controls how big that opening is, and it controls how much light is sort of allowed to enter the eye. So when it's dark, I'm going to open it up. When it's really, really bright out, I'm going to make that opening really, really small so that I can control how much stimulation my eye is kind of getting. Okay, and here's just a cool picture. A lot of people have some really, really cool eyes when you take a look at them. But again, good multiple choice question is which is the colored part of your eye, and it's going to be that iris. Okay, so pupil dilation and control. Constriction is the proper term when we're making it smaller, and we're going to have, this is in response to, again, bright light. Dilation is going to be in response to dim light, or we're going to open it up. It's going to be controlled by our sympathetic fibers. Okay, for dilation, parasympathetic fibers are going to control constriction, and then the pupil size may reflect interest and emotion, which is really, really interesting too. So if something appeals to you, your pupils are going to dilate. If you're feared, if you're afraid, or you're bored, then they're going to kind of constrict. So this is part of, my daughter likes to watch all these police and spy shows, and this is part of kind of reading body language and sort of watching people and sort of trying to decide if they're, how they're reacting to certain things that you're saying. You can monitor their pupil because it's something that they're not going to be able to kind of consciously control. And this is another important study. Okay, so this is a really cool thing that they did at Princeton University, and they basically did this study to kind of look at your pupil size based on how hard your brain is working. So if you're calculating 9 times 13, your pupil is going to dilate slightly because, it's not that hard of a question, okay? But if you try to do 29 times 13, which is a little bit trickier, it's going to widen further, okay? And your pupil is going to remain dilated until you sort of reach the answer or you kind of stop trying. So it's one of those things where, again, it's linked to how active your brain is kind of working at that particular time. Okay, and it is amazing when hopefully you guys did the neural test and you did the flashlight kind of in the eye in the dark room, and it is amazing how much your pupil can kind of dilate and how small it can get based on how much light is in the room. This one is for more safety stuff, because a lot of times people think about, when you're drinking and driving, or how do different things kind of affect, why is it so important not to have alcohol in your system when you're kind of drive? And what happens is it affects this ability to kind of constrict and dilate your pupil and sort of control how much light is coming in. So it's going to affect your vision and make it where you just cannot see very, very well, and you can adapt to things really, really quickly. Okay, so just physiologically, this is why it's so important and why people are such bad drivers when they're drinking. All right, so we're back to this picture, and again, we want to kind of just find this picture, and we want to label all the things that we've kind of already found, right? So we did the outer layer, we did the vascular layer, right? So now we're down to like the iris, and then we get the pupil, and then we're going to look at all the other little structures that we have to kind of look at the inner layer, okay? And I can also kind of see that lens in here too. Here's a picture of a real eye, okay, which is really cool. And now we get to the inner layer, which is going to be the retina. And again, a lot of people have kind of heard the term retina, but we're maybe, again, just not so clear as to what part of the eye or sort of what the function is going to be. So the innermost layer of the eye, it's going to develop from an extension of the brain. And again, this is how I'm getting those impulses up to my brain. It's going to contain millions of photoreceptors, so millions of photoreceptors, and they're going to convert light energy, okay? And then we have these neurons. They're going to be involved in processing those light responses, and then we're going to have these glial cells, and they're going to be our supporting cells that keep everything functioning properly. So your retina consists of two layers. We have an outer pigmented layer, and then we have an inner neural layer, and this is the part where, again, we're going to absorb this light, we're going to create these little impulses, and then we're going to send that information kind of up to the brain, okay? But it all kind of starts with these pigments absorbing the light that kind of comes into our eye. So here's what we're talking about. So this is that back part of my eye. I can see the optic nerve here, right? And I can see this kind of neural layer, and then I can see this tiny little sort of pigmented layer. But this is what we're kind of talking about here with the retina. Okay, and here's a zoomed in picture of my retina again. So here is my pigmented layer, and then I can see I have all these little bipolar cells, and I'm basically trying to, transmit these impulses up to this nerve that's going to go up to my eye or my optic nerve, okay? So the outer layer of the retina is going to contain pigmented cells. What's important about them is that they're going to absorb light, okay, and they're going to prevent it from scattering within the eye. They also have cells that are going to keep everything healthy, right? So phagocytes that are going to help with photoreceptor renewal. We're going to look a lot more at these photoreceptors and these pigments when we get into the actual vision part of the chapter. And they can also kind of store vitamin A. And, when you talk about healthy vision and healthy eyes, people always say you should be taking vitamin A. And this is kind of why, is that it's needed for that photoreceptor health, okay? So this is why people that eat a lot of things or take a lot of supplements with vitamin A in there are going to have better vision. Okay, so the inner neural layer of the retina is going to be this transparent inner layer. It's going to extend anteriorly to the posterior margin of the ciliary body. And again, this is where you want to have that picture in front of you so that I can kind of follow things, okay? But the junction where these two are going to meet is going to be called this ora serrata, and that's basically going to mean the sawtooth margin, and you'll see where it has this kind of zigzag pattern when you look at it in the picture. Okay, composed of three main types of neurons, from posterior to anterior. I have my photoreceptors, I have my bipolar cells, and I have my ganglion cells. And we saw the picture a minute ago here, but it's just, again, this is the pathway of me getting these impulses and this information to that optic nerve so that I can get it back up to my brain. Okay, so here is the ora serrata. So here is my retina, right? And you can see it only comes around. It doesn't go all the way to the front. It just comes up to this little junction here. And then we're going to have that ora serrata that's going to be that little margin. Okay, and then here are, again, we talked about photoreceptors, that's my rods and my cones. We talked about bipolar cells and ganglion cells. Not super important for us. We just want to realize that this is the pathway, right? Vision, light is kind of coming in. It's going to hit this pigmented layer, and then I'm going to kind of filter these impulses up towards these ganglion or up towards the optic nerve so that I can send those impulses up to the brain. Okay, and again, we'll come back to the rods and the cones and the photoreceptors in a minute. Okay, so here's just another picture of everything kind of put together. And then now we get to learn a little bit more about this neural layer. Okay, so signals are produced in response to light. They're going to spread from the photoreceptors to the bipolar cells and then the ganglion cells. And we're creating, again, an action potential or an impulse. And then again, we're going to send that through that optic nerve and it's going to go up to the brain. Okay, so that's just the main pathway that things are kind of taking so that our brain can kind of analyze the information and be able to tell us sort of what we're seeing. Okay, so photoreceptors, there are 250 million photoreceptors in that neural layer. Okay, and that's an awful lot of photoreceptors, right? And we have two main types. And again, these are things that most people have kind of heard of before, is that we have our rods and our cones, and they're going to do different things for us, okay? So my rods are going to help me with dim light, okay, or peripheral vision receptors. They're going to be very numerous. You saw that in the picture where we have way more rods than we do cones. Very sensitive to light. This is what they don't do for me, though, okay? They don't give me sharp images, and they don't play any role in our color vision, okay? So a good multiple choice question again here is my rods are our dim light receptors, okay? And then we know this, and my daughter kind of likes to go through my PowerPoint presentation sometimes too, and we kind of did this little test and I'm going to kind of show you, but this is kind of how we know this, is that, color is going to disappear and edges are going to appear fuzzy when we're in a room that does not have a lot of light, okay? So we can see kind of shapes, but we don't really get those sharp sort of images, and we don't get to see any kind of color. Cones are going to be the opposite. They're going to be bright light, and they're going to be for color, and this one is easy to remember because cone starts with a C, and color is also going to start with a C. So here's the picture that I kind of showed my daughter here, right? Where I can see that there's a table, I can see that there's chairs, I can't really see sharp edges, right? I can't tell what color things are. And we kind of did this test in our house where, we sort of put, this is our dining room, so we just kind of put this on this little stand here, okay? And then we turned all the lights real low and we kind of took this picture. And again, I can see the shapes, but I can't really see the color. I can just see kind of like the edges and sort of what shape everything kind of is, right? And then let's see if any of you guys can guess kind of what this is. And this is what it is, right? It's kind of like just a normal little Pringles can, right? But to see the color and to see the sharp edges, I have to have more light, okay? So just a really cool thing that you can kind of do at home just to kind of test to see if it's kind of true, okay? So here is, again, this little pathway of light. These are coming into the eye. They're going to hit this back pigmented layer, and then I'm going to move those impulses forward and then out that optic nerve and sort of up to the brain to be interpreted. Okay, and then here's again just a zoomed in picture of pigmented layer. So everything's coming in, hits the pigmented layer, right? Stimulates my rods and cones, impulses, optic nerve, up to the brain. And then here's just a real picture of what we just kind of talked about, which is really, really cool too. Okay, and then we come back to this one again. We just want to make sure that we can kind of just label, keep everything in its proper little order. Okay, we also have these internal chambers and fluids. These are always good multiple choice questions too. Okay, and so we have the lens is going to divide the eye into two segments. So we're going to have this anterior segment that's in front of the lens, and we're going to have this posterior segment that is behind the lens. Okay, so here's my lens, anterior segment, posterior segment, and you can already see from this picture that they're going to be filled up with fluids, but they're going to have different names. Okay, so the front part's going to have the aqueous humor, and then the posterior part is going to have this vitreous humor. Okay, so the iris divide. Now we also get a couple other little chambers. Okay, this is a little bit tricky too. So we get that segments that are in the front or the back of the lens. We also get these little segments here. Okay, so the iris is going to also divide the anterior segment, okay, into different little chambers. So in this one, we're only talking about the anterior segment or the anterior part of the eye. We're going to get this anterior chamber, which is between the cornea and the iris, and we're going to get this posterior chamber, and that's going to be between the iris and the lens, okay? But this is the part, the anterior part, and this part I don't really need you to be aware of, or I would never make you kind of label this. But you just want to remember that that anterior segment is going to be filled up with that aqueous humor, okay? And then the posterior one is going to be the vitreous humor. But again, it's all about supplying nutrients, carrying away waste, keeping the shape of the eyeball, okay? But here's a little picture just in case, right? So we find the lens, and this is posterior, anterior, and then you can see where the iris also divides that front part into a front and a back part, okay? But not super, super important for us. You want to concentrate on just those main structures and sort of know definitely what fluids are in each chamber. Okay, so now we get to this posterior segment, and again, we said it's filled up with this vitreous humor. Okay, it transmits lights, supports the surface of the lens, holds the neural layer of the retina in place, counteracts pressures of anything kind of pushing or applying force to the eyeball. Glaucoma, which is another thing you guys might be familiar with your grandparents or with your parents. This is going to be a problem with drainage, okay? And this is why we talk about these humors or these fluids. So drainage of the aqueous humor is blocked in glaucoma, and what happens is it causes this fluid to kind of build up, and we get this increase in pressure within the eye. And the problem with that is that eventually it compresses that retina and it compresses that optic nerve, and people will actually kind of lose their vision, okay? So very important to remember that, if they ask you, hey, what's the problem with glaucoma? It's the drainage of that fluid, okay? And then this is something that my daughter taught me like a while ago. It's funny the amazing things that little kids learn when they're super, super young. They're already kind of learning things that, I certainly did not go over until I was probably in high school, okay? But this is basically like night vision. So she was going through my stuff again and kind of was like, hey, do you know why these animals have this, why you can see their eyes and why they reflect sort of at nighttime and they sort of light up? She was like, yeah, they have this extra layer in their eye, okay? And that's kind of what happens is that they have this tapetum lucidum, which actually helps them. This is why they can see so good at night, because they can kind of reflect light back into their retina that we can't do. But this is also why when you're driving and you see animals on the side of the road, that their eyes will kind of light up, okay? So they have this little extra little layer in here, okay? So just a cool thing, just kind of like a side fact to kind of know that's pretty interesting. And then here is red eyes in photos. So because we don't have that reflective layer, okay, this is how our eyes kind of turn up when we get this light. And this is one of those things where cameras now are, this used to be a big problem, especially when I was a kid, where people would take your picture and it was like your eyes would always kind of end up being red. But what they do now, if you know with like new cameras, is that they're going to have the flash go off a couple times really fast before it actually takes the picture. And what this is doing is when they put that flash out for a second before they take the picture, you're actually going to constrict your pupils and you're not going to allow as much light to come in, and you won't get that sort of blood red color kind of from the retina. Okay, so you're basically just your camera is going to get you to constrict your pupil and sort of limit the amount of light that comes in so that your eyes will look normal when you're in the photo. Alright, so now we get to the lens. So it's a transparent and flexible structure, can change shape to precisely focus light on the retina. It's going to be enclosed within this thin elastic capsule. So it's avascular, okay, because blood vessels would interfere with the transparency. It's going to have two layers, so it's going to have epithelial, it's going to have lens fibers, and we're going to continually sort of add new fibers throughout the life of the lens, okay? But as you get older, your lens is going to become larger, it's going to become more dense, it's going to become less elastic, it's going to sort of impair the ability of you to sort of focus light properly. And this is kind of a big reason why a lot of times our vision gets worse as we get a little bit older. Okay, so here's our lens, and I can see the little fibers in there. And then when we talk about glaucoma, the other thing you're going to come to hear about all the time too is going to be these cataracts, okay? And cataracts are going to be the clouding of the lens. So glaucoma was more the pressure, right, of the fluid in the eye. Cataracts are more the clouding of the lens, and it's going to result from age-related hardening and thickening of the lens. Secondary consequence of diabetes, smoking, exposure to sunlight requires surgical removal of the lens and implantation of an artificial one. And this is really, really cool, okay? But this is kind of your clouded lens. This is what they do when they're trying to fix it. And this is one where it happens so gradually with people that they don't even realize how bad their vision is kind of getting. And what I will say with all my patients that are older that have this kind of surgery is that they're just so happy once they do it that they get that vision back, okay? So it's one of those things where you don't want to wait until your vision has been so bad and it just impairs just your enjoyment of life for so long before you kind of have this done. So it's one of these things, it's this really, really cool thing that they can do where it really gives people back a lot of just enjoyment in their life and just the things that they can do, okay? But this is kind of always a scary picture when I kind of look at it, that they can go in and do these cool surgeries kind of on your eyes. This is a picture. This is really cool. I don't know if anybody knows who the artist is for this, but this is Monet. And the cool thing about Monet, or not, maybe not a cool thing, but one of the interesting things that if you ever study him that you're going to realize is that he had really, really bad cataracts, okay? And we're lucky in Chicago where we have a lot of Monets kind of down in the city at the art museum. But if you ever go down there and you're kind of looking at all the Monets, what you can do is you can kind of look at the timeline. And what you can do is you can see with his earlier paintings, they're really, really clear, okay? But then you can see as he gets older, he's a very interesting guy because he painted the same things over and over that were just on his property. So a lot of times he painted the haystacks, he painted the bridges, but he just repainted them as he got older and older and older. And what you can see from the timeline is that his vision just gets blurrier and blurrier and blurrier. Okay, so this is an early photo of the bridge, right, and the lilies. And then I get a little blurrier here. And then this will be later in his life where, because it's the bridge, you can kind of make it out. But I mean, if you saw this without seeing the other ones and you didn't know that he had cataracts, you would have a really, really hard time, knowing what this picture is, okay? And then here's another one where you get this garden, later it gets way, way blurry. And then it gets to the point where, again, you can't even really distinguish. And he really was interesting because he just painted what he saw, right? He didn't paint from his memory. He was just like, hey, this is what I see and this is what I'm going to paint. So just a really interesting way to sort of realize how bad cataracts and how much they're going to kind of affect your vision. Okay, so that's the end of part one. Part two, we're going to come back and look at sort of how do we transmit these impulses up to our brain? How do we see colors? How do we do all these different little things? But again, at this point, you just want to make sure you go over those structures, know them really, really well, and keep that picture beside you so that when we come back to it in part two, it'll make much more sense.